This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 130 live on YouTube, live on Twitter, X, whatever you're calling it these days. Quickly, I want to shout out to Mets play-by-play broadcaster Keith Rad, who joined me on the episode last week. It was great to get his insight as we head into spring training and just take a look at, what he does to prepare as a broadcaster. I've always been this audio radio nerd and have loved that type of media for so long, which is, why I do this podcast today. So make sure you follow Keith on X at Keith Rad and on Instagram at Broadcast Bites, because this season, follows all his foodie travels around the league. Also, shout out to Mike Silva, host of the Talking Mets podcast. He invited me last week to do the first ever, and hopefully not last, Talking Mets movie night. We went back in time to 1988 for opening day, where Darryl Strawberry hit an absolute moonshot on the Mets' path to victory. It was a lot of fun watching the TV broadcast, which we got off of YouTube, of all things. So it was fun doing that. I'll put that episode link in the description of this podcast for you to check out. Hopefully my voice hangs on today. Yesterday, I was at the Stadium Series for the Devils versus the Flyers. Very cold. A lot of screaming out there with the fans. A lot of fun. And my Devils came away with the victory. You got the Rangers and Islanders playing today. If you haven't been to one of the Stadium Series or Winter Classics and you love hockey, they also have the Heritage Classic. That's something you got to go to. Make sure you check that out if you're a huge hockey fan. But today, this week's show, pitchers and catchers have reported. Actually, the whole entire team has reported and are set for their full squad workout. And joining me now to recap what has been going on in Mets camp is Jeffrey Bellone. Jeffrey is the co-founder of Mets Fix, a comprehensive Mets news and analysis newsletter, which you need to subscribe to. I'm one of the ones that are subscribing to that newsletter. A lot of great insight, and I really enjoy everything that comes out from there. Jeffrey, it has been a while. Last time it was all audio for us. Now it's all visual. But Welcome back to the Subway to Shea podcast. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, good. No, thanks for having me. I hear you talking about the Stadium Series, and meanwhile, I just saw the Rangers. It was 5-3 Isles, and the Rangers scored 2 goals in the final minutes as we're joining here. So it's 5-5.
Oh my goodness! So that game's probably going to go into overtime now. So yeah, man,
so they got a wild one there.
It got a wild one. Those games are just so much fun to watch. I hate to go into hockey right now, but I'm a huge hockey fan. I know you love hockey as well, and just to see those kind of games in the outdoors and just the whole atmosphere. I mean, like they had the fan fest, they had a concert. Every time the Devils scored a goal, they had the band that did the gold song. They had them play every time they scored, and that was kind of cool. Kind of reminded me of Edwin Diaz coming out to trumpets that one game. But as we talk about the Mets and go into 2024, we have to go back a little bit, because finally putting the finishing touches on what was probably one of the worst seasons in Mets history, with payroll and just how everything played out. And, former Mets general manager Billy Epler, he's been suspended and put on the ineligible list through the 2024 World Series. He was suspended for what is the improper use of the injured list. A lot of GMs do this, but, maybe this sets a precedent now. And we know that it's quite possible that a Mets employee was this whistleblower that provided information to Major League Baseball. We know that Epler, liked, and you mentioned this in your newsletter, optionality when it came to his players, especially last season with the bullpen. What do you make of this whole entire situation with Epler and the suspension?
Yeah, I think this is one where I'm with everyone else, right? Like, it's clear that they're using Epler as an example. It didn't even seem like they're, if you're going to use him as an example, I guess what I was surprised about is they didn't release, like, even if it was through a reporter, like what was like an egregious example of what he did. I mean, maybe you wanted to protect the player who was also part of it. But, I think everyone was guessing Tommy Hunter, and then Tommy Hunter's in the New York Post defending Epler. I think Nito had like an eye injury that sounded a bit phantom, but then it came out like that's a condition like he's been dealing with, like dry eye. You see that, you're like, that seems like a strange, reason to go on IL. So yeah, it's just weird because normally if the GM of the team gets suspended for an entire season the following year, right? And obviously, who knows what would have happened under Stearns if he would have actually stayed or not. But usually that means you did something like pretty serious, like the Mets like cheated, like something really crazy happened. The fact that it's the entire year and it's basically something that everyone's like, whatever. I think that's the oddest part, that the length of the punishment relative to other things that we've seen happen throughout baseball that have not gotten even this long of a suspension.
Yeah, you mentioned Tommy Hunter. You mentioned Tomas Nido. I think also Luis Guillorme was having a couple issues. We saw like a couple of cryptic tweets from, I guess, his dad on Twitter about how his use was coming back from injury. So we really don't know who this person is. I'm pretty sure it's going to stay anonymous for as long as they can hold that in. And the Mets have kind of been, even with when it comes to signing players, they have, since Steve Cohen has taken over the team, it's mostly been, close to the vest. Everything has been, held in check. Unlike when we were under the Wilpons, everything got out to the media. So I don't know if this person will ever come out or the name will ever come out. All I know is that Epler is going to be out for the year. Thankfully, the Mets did not get reprimanded in any part of this. So that's probably the biggest takeaway when you talk about the future of the New York Mets. And to, end with this, because this is kind of tied to it, probably about a couple of days before that, Buck Showalter went on foul territory and made some comments that were, interesting. He kind of wished that they stayed the course because he thought they would have, made the postseason if they would have kept all their players. Obviously, we know they traded Verlander, Scherzer, everyone kind of got traded. They brought in this new crop from the minors, and we'll see how they eventually turn out. An interesting thing he did talk about was he could not really get with the load management. And the example that they used was Brandon Nimmo, resting him after having a huge game and, running around the bases, and then they wanted to, kind of give him the day off. Daniel Vogelback also as well at DH was an issue. We didn't know if it was Buck Showalter that wanted to keep him in, Epler that wanted to keep him in, and that became some sort, of a problem. Do you think that Buck Showalter gets too much of the blame for last season? Should he still, be manager right now?
I'm one that I think a manager is a bit overrated in terms of how much I think it's obviously important, the manager's role in terms of keeping the clubhouse together, and he is clearly well liked. But I think with the way that modern front offices run teams, and Showalter alluded to this on that podcast, with the load management and with the analytics, it's no longer just his decision. Maybe Showalter, because he's old fashioned, he gets a little more leeway than say Carlos Mendoza could this season. But since we know that it's a partnership and we know these decisions are made not just by the manager, it's hard to either give him full credit when they won 101 games or give him full blame when it went the other way the following year. So I guess what I'm saying is, because I don't see it as being such a big impact, I feel like it's great for like sports talk about the manager. But I don't think that now the Mets are doomed because they have, Carlos Mendoza instead of Showalter, or they didn't get Craig Counsell. I mean, that's the great example that I think will be interesting to follow is when you look at the Cubs, you look at the Mets, let's say you had to bet $1 million on who wins more games over the next 3 years. And then I said, you can only get 3 pieces of information before you make that bet. How would you pick? Tell me who the manager is as one of those 3 pieces of information, or would you want to know, tell me their lineup, tell me the rotation, tell me the top prospects coming up? So I just think that a manager is kind of so far down the list now in terms of priority that it's not something I get too caught up on, even though it becomes such a big topic, I think, especially in New York, because you deal with the media a lot, and that's a big part of the role. And maybe that's the biggest part of the role now. Again, it's not saying they don't have any impact, but it's just, I think how they work with the front office is most important. And it's hard for us as fans to truly know that, since we don't see the day to day of that relationship.
And it does seem from the comments that Buck made that maybe there were some issues that he didn't get along with Epler and with the analytics team. I wanted to bring him back, but I do understand, and I have said this from the beginning, when you get a new regime and a new team in here like David Stearns has, I do like a fresh, clean slate to allow him to pick who he wants to come in here, whether they had gotten Craig Counsell or not. He does have a new manager that will now fall under, him, and work with that analytics team, and hopefully Carlos Mendoza does a very good job. And speaking of Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns, we let that part of the past go. We move on to the fresh new 2024 New York Mets, and not much came from Carlos Mendoza's initial press conference at the start of spring training. Some of the questions that were asked to me felt like very unnecessary, asking him if he has the same desire as the fans do in New York. What is he supposed to say? So there were a lot of simple
Right.
questions that were out there, but the Stearns press conference had a lot of good nuggets that came out of there. He mentioned not ruling out acquiring more players, as the team does intend to stick with, Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos for, third base DH to start the season. And hearing that and seeing all the things that he said for, this entire offseason, I don't think they will add a top line DH. There's only really one left in JD Martinez. I think it will clog the lineup from other players being evaluated. And I'm saying this is because this is what David Stearns has pretty much said throughout the entire offseason. So I think Mark Vientos will get that first shot. We've seen guys like Jorge Soler, he's going to the Giants. Gio Urshela was mentioned, but he's not really a DH. He profiles more as that, third baseman. And again, if you're going to go with Beatty or Vientos, you don't really want to, throw Urshela in there unless he's going to come off the bench. But they got Joey Wendell. They even have Jose Iglesias, who they got to a minor league deal, who could probably come up. The Mets did sign Ji-Man Choi and are probably working on a deal with Luke Voigt, both on minor league deals. So we could see them at some point if Vientos and DJ Stewart don't work out. I still think that Starling Marte will eventually be the best option to head to DH role, especially if Drew Gilbert lights it up in AAA. Now, I think it was earlier on in the day that Starling Marte met with the press and really wants to play the field and be out there in right field. We'll see what happens. But, after seeing him in winter ball, David Stearns says Marte looks fully healthy. So, with all of these in-house names that I've mentioned, what do you like to start, or who do you like to start as DH when we get to the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Stearns has made it pretty clear, right? He wants to give rope to the young players, which is why he didn't, they weren't going to go out and sign a JD Martinez unless the price just became, overwhelmingly cheap, that, they just had no choice. And then with the signings of Voigt and Choi this weekend, he's basically saying, look, I know we have, DJ Stewart's not a kid, but someone who doesn't have a ton of, major league success. And then Vientos from the left and right side. So let's get two veterans, right, from the left and right side, that to make sure essentially that it doesn't become a disaster, right? Like if either there's an injury or it becomes clear quickly that, remember with DJ Stewart, he basically had one hot month, right? He had a hot August. Yeah. And now, you're kind of banking on like, okay, this guy can be your left side of a platoon. I mean, it's very easy that he does not turn into like, a full piece for you, which is why people obviously are screaming for replacement. But I think that's why with the Choi signing in particular, the thought is, okay, yeah, if Stewart proves he's not what we saw for August last year, we at least have a veteran who, it was really injuries last year that hurt Choi. But before that, all the guy has done is got, draws walks and provide some pop. He obviously doesn't give you speed, right? And he's not going to do much else. But I think that's what those signings signal is. Yes, we're giving rope to the young kids or the inexperienced or unproven guys, but we're going to have some fallback options. And what will be interesting is how those fullback options stick around, because as veterans to minor league deals, they're going to have opportunities to leave and go somewhere else if they don't get a spot on the active roster. And it's one thing to say, well, right now in AAA, they actually need a first baseman at AAA, so one of them could play first base there. But if both of them are there, now it's kind of impacting their opportunity to shine. I don't know if they would want to stick around there forever. So I do think that there will be sort of this point where early in the year where, the Mets are going to have to decide, are we going to, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think you're going to get a lot of rope with, say, a DJ Stewart, especially if Choi is hitting down in Syracuse, if that's where he ends out starting. And I think that's good because, I think what Mets fans were most frustrated with last year is just sticking with guys too long. I think they're going to cycle through these guys. They're going to give them some opportunity. But I think that at least with these signings, they're showing they're not going to just, live and die on those on the options they originally had.
I know I was not too upset with the deal that DJ Stewart got to, come back to the Mets. I just didn't want him being that main DH option based off of, like you said, those 2 weeks that he had. Because if you look, even after those 2 weeks, he was kind of back to the DJ Stewart we had from the beginning of the season. So I was concerned with that whole situation, but we'll see what happens with him and Mark Vientos and the whole splitting of the DH. It hasn't worked out for the Mets since the DH was implemented into the league. And I hope that they don't fall down that rabbit hole again. But I do understand bringing in a guy like JD Martinez clogs up what they're trying to do when it comes to evaluating a guy like Mark Vientos, who needs the at-bats right now. We need to see what we got in Mark Vientos. We need to see what we're going to be getting in Brett Beatty. And if they don't, turn the corner and start producing, it's going to be probably, their last chance at being a mainstay on this Mets roster. Now, before we get to Pete Alonso, just want to, hit up the chat. We got 14 people right now watching this live. Yuki Matsui just wanted to say, what's up? How you doing, my friend? Carlos Ortiz is in here as well. Patty in NYC also watching the New York Rangers game while watching this, doing double tasking.
That's right. They won in overtime, I think I saw. So there you go.
Now that's a comeback. Unbelievable.
Right.
That's crazy. That's my sports. Let's go. Let's LFGM, and we're going to be talking to LFGM shortly when we get into Pete Alonso. But great stuff so far. Leave your comments, leave your questions, whatever you want to discuss. We are here, and if you want to add to the conversation, we like to do that as well. And as we move into Pete Alonso, Stearns said he is most certain that the Mets and Pete Alonso will not get a contract extension before he hits free agency. To quote him himself, when you have a really talented player who is really good, who's entering his final year of club control, who happens to be represented by Scott Boras, these things generally end up into free agency. And that's what he told the reporters at Mets camp. And that they understand that. Call me crazy, but I still feel in my gut that Pete Alonso is going to get some extension before the year begins. I don't know. I'm just like hoping for it. It could happen. It might not happen. But Pete, when he came to camp and addressed the media, he said he's opening to listening. And most importantly to me, he will even listen during the season, not putting a hard deadline, on the team, kind of like what Francisco Lindor did before they signed him. What was it? Maybe 24 hours before opening day began. So I'm happy to hear that from Pete Alonso, that he's, giving the Mets that opportunity to, reach out to him, to listen to the offers. And I really do hope something gets done there. Now, I want to go back in December. You created a payroll kind of primer with a look into 2025 and even 2026. And I'm going to bring that up here. If you're having a hard time, if you're watching this and having a hard time seeing it, just make sure you go full screen so you can see all the numbers here. And You said in your takeaways for 2025 that you think it will still be difficult for the Mets to, reset their tax penalties, if we assume that they will eventually extend Pete Alonso, adding, 30 million to the books would leave the Mets with only 24 million in breathing room before the initial tax threshold.
Yep.
What do you think is the right deal, not only for Pete Alonso, but for the Mets to fit into the 2025 season?
Yeah, well, first, just a couple of things since this payroll I did before they made a couple more signings. So the current year, they're actually up to 322 now, is where I'm projecting them, just to give people the full picture. So it's
This was out in
ironic.
December, right?
Right. So it's like it's
Yep.
ironic that, all the talk is what the Mets haven't spent, right? And this is key to the Alonso question. Um, but with all of that, all of the dead money, right there, with you see it with Verlander, you see it with
Yep.
Scherzer, even with McCann. All that dead money really this year was about, and why you saw them signing for the most part only 1-year deals, because they knew they were going to be way up against it this year. And then everything basically clears next year, where if you only include the players on guaranteed contracts, they actually do have a lot of space. I think they only have, it's like 140 million around there in guaranteed contracts. But then, you have guys due for arbitration, you got guys on split contracts, you have some of the other accounting there. And that's where that number comes down. A key piece, and we saw in the news this week about Verlander, whether he's a little bit behind schedule. If he pitches 140 innings,
Mhm.
the Mets would be on the hook for half of his contract he triggers for 2025. So all this is to just kind of recap to say they're going to have breathing room next winter, without a doubt. Whether Verlander's option gets exercised or not, you're going to have breathing room. But if you are signing Alonso, and this is why I think it's a complicated decision in the front office mind, if you're signing him to a number that is, I'll say, outlandish to how other first basemen are paid, Freddie Freeman, right, or Matt Olson, and you're getting into 30 million AAV. Well, suddenly you're cutting into that space a lot, and we know, because all the players we just talked about who are only on 1-year deals, which is almost the whole rotation, you have a lot of shopping you still have to do. Which, yeah, that makes it where you're probably not going to reset the luxury tax next year if you go down that path. And especially, who knows if they go after a Juan Soto, a Corbin Burns, or whoever it is. But I guess to me with Alonso, it comes down to how much do the Mets value that he is a homegrown star, right? If they believe that is important, and with Steve Cohen being the owner, there should be really no reason why you can't pay him outside of kind of, quote, the market value, right? You can pay him whatever you want, right? As long as he's comfortable paying luxury taxes, you could do that. But what I wonder is, especially with Stearns now in charge, is maybe they're not thinking that way. Maybe they're thinking, we're fine paying for big contracts. We'll give out the biggest contracts in baseball, but we rather it be for a Juan Soto than a Pete Alonso. And we're not going to pay added attention that he's a homegrown star. We're going to just look at it as, who is a player that plays a unique position, that's young, that we're signing them, when most of their career is ahead of them. And that's where, if you're a big Alonso fan, I would be a little concerned that, that could be, to me, the strategy that they decide to take, and why we don't see much movement right now in Alonso, because they just do not want to get in this position where they're paying him 30 million when they can maybe get Soto for 42 million. And one is, in his mid 20s, and one's entering 30. One plays, a premium defensive position, and one does not.
I think the concern for me comes with, as great as Juan Soto is and can be, the fact that replacing Pete Alonso with Juan Soto really doesn't change the dynamic of the lineup. You're just now replacing the power, which, even with Pete Alonso, the Mets need another bat out
Yep.
there. And that's why there was the talk of JD Martinez coming in, or Soler. If you're just replacing Soto with Alonso, I don't really know, how that dynamically changes the team. And the fact that now you're still going to have to look into some of these kids to, show up, and a Drew Gilbert being, the guy, and then the Jet Williams and all these kids coming up, unless there's some other guys out there that they can get who, hit, I guess, 20 to 30 home runs a year, in somewhat the production. But I was always looking at it in the terms of, the Mets would resign Pete Alonso and then get someone to protect him in the order, because I always felt that that's what was really needed. I mean, Pete Alonso, for as long as he's been here, has really not had any protection in this lineup. So I am concerned when it comes to that. When they said today, or it was in the news, that the Mets would go after both Soto and Alonso at the same time. I don't even know how that works with the money, like how you explained. I don't know how this ends up. I hope it ends up with, Pete resigning. Obviously, the homegrown Met, that always plays into my mind, and it plays into a lot of fans' minds. You have That's My Sports even saying it. Ed Kranepool, David Wright are the only lifelong Mets. Just signed Pete Alonso already. I think also what happens is now, Pete Alonso may not be the best first baseman out there, right? Freddie Freeman is ahead of him, and Matt Olson, to a lot of people, is ahead of Pete Alonso. But when you go into this free agency, and you look at the free agents that are power hitters, you look at what position they play. Pete Alonso is going to get a lot of money no matter what. That gets to be factored into that. So, what happens with Pete Alonso? I hope he resigns. I don't know where it goes with Soto. If you had to do the choice, I guess, how do you think it's going to be one or the other? And which one are you choosing? Are you going Soto, or are you going Alonso?
Yeah, so I think you look at what the Dodgers have done, right? And we know the Mets are kind of fawn after that as a model, and they have let homegrown popular players walk. Whether it's Cody Bellinger, that was kind of a different situation because he was struggling, but Corey Seager, he was a star shortstop from them. They let him go to Texas. And then now this offseason, everyone is complaining how the Dodgers are, the team ruining baseball because they spent over $1 billion on all these guys. But the theme that they've had is when they spend big on guys who are universally considered the best at their positions. That's how they approach it. So I think that that's how the Mets want to operate. They want to say, we have the ability to pay anyone we want, but we're going to get the absolute best guys. So I honestly think that depending on what Alonso's asking for, if maybe he asked for like some extra years to bring that AAV down. But if he's asking with Boris for some, like let's reset the first base market, because now, GMs have cooled to spending big what they used to spend on first baseman back in like Prince Fielder type of days. And they want to have this record-setting contract. I just think that is tough. That's going to be tough to justify if, in fact, you feel confident you can sign a Soto or a Corbin Burns, right? As we saw this offseason, the Mets can make the biggest offer. That does not mean you're going to get the player. So I guess to answer your question is, if I'm reading the tea leaves and I feel confident that I could, in fact, sign a Juan Soto and a Corbin Burns, and then, the feeling was there's not the appetite to also sign Alonso, because that would be a lot at once. I would pick those two. Even though, it hurts to do that. I just think you can't think with heart when you're a front office exec. You're getting a guy when he's 24 years old, or I guess what, he'd be turning 25 by next year, versus a guy turning 30. Just that alone, on a long-term deal, that's 5 extra years of value you're getting. So, I hate to say it, like it kind of hurts me to say it, but I feel like to me, I think that's where they're going. They want to be that team that says, we're going to spend big, but we're not going to just pay anyone and everyone, and I guess I shouldn't say it that way, because Alonso's not anyone and everyone. But the point is, If they feel they can get those Soto or a Burns or someone like that, I think they're going to prioritize them.
Well, with the Mets doing this right now, allowing him to hit free agency, we're in a similar situation as the Yankees were with Aaron Judge. And the hope is that this last season, you want Pete Alonso to take off, because if
Yeah,
he's taking off, he's only helping the Mets play better. The only thing that happens with that is now the price tag goes even
goes up.
higher. So it's a positive, a negative in some sort of ways. But at the end of the day, what you said earlier is probably what's most important. When the Mets missed out on Yamamoto, it wasn't because they didn't offer enough money. They did. The Mets weren't in a great situation that Yamamoto wanted to be a part of. They
Hmm.
weren't a winning organization. And, as much money the Mets can throw out to Pete and they can throw out to Soto, if this team doesn't turn a corner this season and plays well and are out of it by the trade deadline,
Right.
they're going to have a hard time next free agency. No matter how great the free agent class is, the team has to play well and show signs of improvement if they are going to acquire some of these top free agents.
Yeah, no, and I think this is where this season, I know, Mets fans aren't as excited because they haven't made the big splashes, but I think it's why this season is so important, because to have a quiet off season and to sign some of these guys like, Severino, or, to go after these guys that kind of improve it deals. If To me, it's actually works more in their favor if they can now have a really good year, proving they picked the right guys, proving that they brought in guys like Chaminade, who maybe they helped him find the right, perfect his pitch mix, showing if you come to the Mets, we're going to actually get the best out of you, similar to like a Dodgers team.
Mhm.
I think that helps that point, versus if they had continued to keep spending and then still kind of were mediocre, then to your point, yeah, if you're a free agent, it's not as attractive. You need to prove that beyond just money, you can be a team that knows how to develop players, knows how to get the best of them. Because then when you're a player looking, where do I want to go? You say, okay, I'm going to go here because they're going to optimize my performance, to the point you're saying. So I think that's why this year is very important. And hopefully, hopefully we see that.
Once again, I'm here with Jeffrey Bellone, co-founder of Mets Fix. Make sure you're subscribing to the Mets Fix newsletter, and you can see some of the great breakdowns and analysis, including what we're going to be talking about right now, and that's the early 25-man roster projection. Now, you had the roster overview that I'm going to pull up here for everyone
A
to
good eye
see.
test.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So that's why I said make sure you put this full screen so you guys can see this very well. Stearns talked about competition this offseason, and that there will be, two spots in the Mets bullpen, possibly the DH spot, which we had talked about, a platoon role, and a bench spot this spring. We already know Ronnie Mauricio is on the 60-day IL. They just signed Shintaro Fujinami. He's officially signed, and he has a minor league option. Ben Gamel, the outfielder, was signed as well. And we talked about G-Man Choi. We talked about Luke Voigt getting some minor league deals. We can go over who is set, who's on the fringe, and, who we will find out, who will fill out this bullpen and the bench. And, obviously, Nimmo, Marte, Pete, McNeil, Lindor, Joey Wendell, Beatty, Francisco Alvarez, and Narvaez. These are guys that are all probably set into the roster. Most, obviously Pete is going to be set, and some of the other guys. But DJ Stewart, Mark Vientos. You got the rotation that's pretty much set at if they stay healthy throughout spring. Senga, Quintana, Severino, Manaya, and Hauser. And when you get to the bullpen, Diaz, Ottavino, Rayleigh, Drew Smith, Diekman, Jorge Lopez, Phil Bickford, and then it gets a little dicey with who could possibly be in that bullpen. What are your early roster projections of what you could see based on obviously talent, but also optionability and being able to be outrighted? What are your thoughts on what this roster can do?
Yeah, I think as you said, for the most part, we know what the active roster is going to look like, right? Um, this spring is an exciting spring if you are someone who in the middle of February, right, is watching this live stream because you can't get enough baseball. The people who are into the deep roster moves, because I think where the action will happen this spring is on who fills out the bottom of the 40-man roster. Because the Mets have so many players who lack options, and just as a quick, explainer, if you are a player, when the season starts, you set your roster, 26-man active roster. Then whoever didn't make that's on a 40-man roster has to be optioned to the minors. But because the Mets have several players on their current 40-man roster who are out of options, meaning the only way they can go to the minors is if they pass through waivers and then they're removed from the 40-man roster and they go on what's called outright assignment. Because of that, you have the opportunity for several of these non-roster invitees. So the people, if you're looking at the graphic, that are kind of at the bottom of each positional list, you have the opportunity for those players to actually crack the 40-man roster just by the fact that they can be optioned to the minors. So someone like a Zach Short, right? He has no minor league options. So either there's an injury during the spring, hopefully not, and then he's making the active roster instead of, say, like a Joey Wendell, or he's going to have to go through waivers again, which means he could be claimed, or he's off the 40-man roster. So now you're replacing his spot. So I think what it does is it makes for a spring where there's guys who normally probably wouldn't have cracked the 40-man roster on a normal roster composition have a chance to do that. And that just gives them a little more opportunity just because of the flexibility they give to, get a call up. Obviously, injuries happen. That changes everything. And then this issue of, there's too many guys and not enough options could fix itself. But based on the current health, that's where I think you'll see some more of the battles. And, that's really the last couple bullpen spots and then who gets injured. And I guess now, to me, it's really about DJ Stewart. I think it's clear, like we already talked about. Vientos is, I think even if he has a bad spring, he's starting the season. But I think Stewart is the one guy, he has an option. The Mets could set if Choi comes in and is just unbelievable and Stewart is not, I think that's the one spot that maybe for a while you thought was a lock that might not be a lock. But otherwise, I think, like I said, it's the last couple of bullpen spots and that's it for the active roster.
It's interesting to see with this roster. If you would go back to the last day of the season and as we got into November, to think that we would only be looking at a bench spot, 2 bullpen spots, and a DH spot. They're not flashy names, right? He did not make flashy moves, David Stearns, this offseason. Not when he was bringing in these players. But you look back at the end of the season and how we only had 2/5 of a rotation left over and had to replace 3 guys. And the fact that he was able to bring in 3, I think could be really good starters. We looked at Verlander and Scherzer and we hoped for the best, but we knew Father Time was coming, injuries were coming, and it ended up not working out. Even when we had Jacob deGrom, it couldn't stay fully healthy and be a part of a full rotation. You hope that these guys can stay healthy, but getting Luis Severino, who I actually kind of wanted during the beginning of the offseason, I wanted him to be that 3rd or 4th guy in the rotation. I thought the deal was decent enough, and then you bring in Minaya and you bring in Hauser during the trade. I think for, what it's worth and how we're only looking at a few positions, I think David Stearns, peripherally did a good job in putting this roster together.
Yeah, no, I think so. And the flexibility, right? I mean, I think as much as, fans got on, the Vogelbacks or, back with Darren Ruff and everything about their lack of production at the plate, to me, what was always most frustrating was just how they lacked versatility on the roster, right? So
Yep.
you were stuck playing them at a certain, in that one role, only, and they weren't going to pinch run. They weren't going to, fill out an extra position. I think with Stearns, we've seen, and this is the other theme at offseason, besides giving runway to the young players, is run prevention. And that's not just with pitching, it's with defense. And in fact, he brings in a Harrison Bader, Tyrone Taylor on the bench, Joey Wendell, etc. These are guys that can play different, positions and can help move guys around. And I think that also adds to your point of, we're not looking, there's not a bunch of holes left to fill, but also there's guys that can kind of play in different roles. And then even in the rotation, right, there's depth there where, if a Sean Manaea doesn't work out as a starter, he had more success, I think, as a reliever in terms of the way he could adapt his approach. Well, maybe you play around with that if you have to, because you have some starting depth, right? So I agree. I think he did as well as you could, given that he wasn't going to give anyone a multi-year deal or spend a lot of money.
Yeah, I like that we finally have some versatility in the lineup. You can even go back to the end of the 2022 season when they had, obviously they had a Daniel Vogelback who did not play a position on the roster going into the playoffs. And then they also had, was it not Mackenzie Gore? It was Terrence Gore, who was only in there to run.
That's right.
Right, Terrence Gore, who's only in there
Yep.
to run. And then those are two spots now that you're taking up with guys that can only be used in certain spots. And it just it didn't work out. And I feel like they didn't address that as well last year. And we saw with how the team played that it just, it was something that needed to be done. And I think Stearns has done an admirable job, and we'll see how it works out as we get into 2024. Now, before we kind of wrap up the show, we got to get into the new Nike Fanatics jerseys. I don't know if I think we talked about this off air and you've seen them. I'm going to bring them up because I think this was Jeannie Metz who posted the two pictures together back to back, but you could see the difference from 2023 to 2024. I originally thought this was all Nike, but I assume that with their partnership with Fanatics that you can see a lot has changed. They moved the MLB emblem below the collar. The lettering is what probably bothers me the most, being that, it's kind of, curved a little more and is a lot smaller. And I think even a good shot of this as well is the Mariners jerseys as well. You had the Gilbert and Kirby ones. It just looks like a replica jersey that I would have bought, as a kid when I was a lot younger. Not to say that I'm going out and getting, the expensive, authentic jerseys, but now these jerseys that, fans were, buying, where there was the Majestic or stuff, they're kind of the same price now for these little, it looks like a cheaper version, but Nike, it says that they're going to sell 3 different versions of it's the Nike Vapor Premier jerseys. One is limited, which is inspired by the on-field jersey. Then there's the game jersey, which is the replica player jersey, and an elite jersey, which is the authentic jersey that's worn on field. And there will be only the limited jerseys is currently available right now. Nike decided, like we said, to lower the MLB logo on the back, reduce the size of the player name lettering. And like I said, the numbering, looks a little weird to me. I know the players, Manfred had mentioned, people will start getting used to it, and the players like, the fabric. And that was the whole thing. It was how to make the players feel comfortable. There was a lot of talk of them not feeling comfortable with the pants because they used to like to customize the pants, and they can't do that with these. So as you can see, these jerseys, they're very interesting. I'm not a fan of them. I do like what we had in the past. And when I always get a player's jersey of someone that is somewhat of a legend on the team. And, I've had, got my Piazza ones. I got David Wright, Strawberry, and all the guys from the 86 teams that I have eventually picked up. So I don't really get any of the new players until it's like, Hall of Fame time and stuff like that. But, what were your thoughts on this new look that we've been bestowed upon us?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's universe. I mean, it's almost hard, especially nowadays, right? Like we don't agree on anything in society, and everyone hates these uniforms because you look at them. I mean, you think back just to being a kid and, you, like you say, you get a replica jersey. If you somehow, like, even if you're in the store and you saw the authentic jersey, that actually added to like the appeal or the aura of being a professional baseball player. Is you're like, oh, these jerseys are so nice, like the
Yeah.
stitching, and like just to wear an authentic jersey, just putting it on meant something, because you were like, it's just better than anything else I'd wear. So the fact that they've taken that away, like I think the joke is George Costanza is the one that, won out in the room in terms of making these uniforms.
Yep.
But I mean, I just don't understand the name. Like, if it was one thing, if like, this was happening at a time where you're trying to, like, maybe you put like the American flag instead of MLB logo and the name's smaller and it's supposed to be symbolic that, like, it's not about the name. It's, we're all playing, together. It's America's sport or something. But like, it just makes no sense why you would shrink the name. Like, I just don't, I just don't get the logic of that. And then the price. I mean, some reason I've never understood this, why baseball jerseys, the authentic ones, are the most expensive. I can get an authentic, Rangers jersey or Devils jersey or whatever, and it's like, what, 279, I think, is
Yeah.
around what they're going for now,
Yep.
which is ridiculous as it is, right? But that's like a full, like, legit sweater. And then a button-up baseball jersey, I think the new one that they're selling for Nike is going for $395. Like, oh, that is ridiculous, and especially when it looks like that. The only thing I was excited about is if you've ever bought the replica version of a jersey, they never have the number on the front of the jersey. They only have in the back. And from what I've seen, that middle range one you talked about that they're offering will actually finally have the number on the front. So you can get that without getting the authentic jersey, which is nice, because that's always something that's bothered me, that you could never get that before. But then that's the other thing that they messed up, is where the buttons come down, it now cuts different. So rather than it like cutting nicely in between the letters, for a lot of teams, it's cutting like through a letter. And I can't remember if they've confirmed with the Mets how it's cutting through the E, but I know with certain teams like the Cardinals, it was cutting weird. So it was just a miss all around. I know the Players Union, I guess, spoke up about it. I
Yeah.
think I think it's, the pants can't be customized, like you said. So maybe that's something they fix. It's not something we see as fans, but there's no way people are going to be flocking to buy these jerseys.
And there doesn't seem to be, I don't know if the authentic one is different, like what they play on, what they wear on the field. But what we saw this week in spring training, it doesn't look like it's the authentic stitching that you would
Right.
get. It looks like those, what is it, like the ironed on patch
Right.
that you would get
Heat
if you would
pressed.
go
Yeah.
to get it done at the game and get your jersey personalized. The lettering I think, is what bothers me the most. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you remember Jared Saltalamacchia? Like, now how would they
Yeah.
put his name on the back of the jersey? Just
Right.
the way how arched it is. It just, I don't know. It looks, it's going to take a while to get used to. I don't know if they're going to change it or not, or what's going to happen. But yeah, the pricing, for an authentic jersey, I know there was a sale last year. And I think I bought maybe about 4 or 5 jerseys for the price of one of those authentic jerseys.
Mhm.
But it was their like the 86 spring training jerseys. Didn't have the
Oh, yeah.
name on the
Yep.
bag. It just had 17 and 16 of those. But if you want like the authentic Mets jersey, you got to go to Mitchell and Ness. Those are the guys that seem to have that locked down, and
Yep.
the prices seem to be somewhat reasonable. We'll see what happens. Maybe we'll get used to it. Maybe not. Maybe they'll change it around. But Manfred seems to think that the fans are going to love this, and they haven't been in love with a lot of the things that Rob Manfred has given to us as of lately. Carlos Ortiz, he doesn't like the new uniforms. He says they suck. And Junior Swingman saying getting a knockoff jersey is a better option, and it might be for some. I do like the fact that they're putting the number on the front. I always thought that as a kid. I'm like, man, why aren't the numbers on the front of
Yeah.
the jerseys?
Yep. Yeah,
Uh,
no, that's nice. But no, the knockoff, that's who makes out in all this, is now
yeah,
the people that make those
they're gonna make a
knockoff
killing.
jerseys. they're gonna be nicer. So like you might as well get that and it'll be cheaper.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The thing I had posted as well is, what if they decided, just take out the name, right? Like the Mets did that. They did that in the early '60s
Yeah.
and in the '60s and the '70s. Then they started putting the names on the back. And then they in
And they had those
'99,
white, yeah, those white ones, right? Were those
yeah,
the ones without the name they wore?
yep.
Yeah.
In '99, they did that as well. A lot of fans don't seem to like it without the name. It's interesting too that that new black jersey that's coming out that's
Mhm.
replacing the one with the white outlining.
Yep.
Um, it's going to be really hard to see the names on the back of that jersey
Yeah.
originally, and
Right.
now with how small the names are going to be, it's going to be a lot harder, but we'll see how the Mets pull it off. And Junior Swingman, he likes it. He likes the known name on the back. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing that come back, but every time I post that, someone's like, "Oh, but they're going to steal from the Yankees doing
Yankees,
that."
that's it. Yeah, if they
All
weren't
right.
in the same towns as Yankees, right? I think that's what always bothers Mets fans with that, right?
Yeah, anything. It was Severino bothered it. Bringing in Buck Showalter, anything that's linked to the Yankees, it drives Met fans nuts. There is another jersey that the Mets will be debuting, the City Connect uniforms. That'll be on April 26th at Citi Field against the Cardinals. The Mets are among 10 teams that have not yet released the City Connect uniform, and I think they're going to release them a week before.
Before, yeah.
And
And what's the betting odds an Apple is gonna be on that uniform in some capacity? I
oh,
feel like that
yeah.
I feel like because the Big Apple, right, obviously, but, like because the City Connect, you gotta have some thing to it, but the fact that that also is the other sorta de facto symbol of the Mets,
Hmm.
I feel like that's the path they're gonna go, but we'll see.
Yeah. The one concern that I had was I don't know if you saw it, but there was a leaked Philly jersey for City
I didn't see that.
Connect, and it's blue and yellow, like no Philly colors. The Philly
Okay.
is written in a weird type of like
Yep,
ghost font, and I was like, oh boy, I am very nervous to see what the Mets
yeah.
come up with when it comes to these City Connect jerseys for sure.
Yeah. No, I'm literally picturing, like, the bottom half of the jersey is like an apple, and then it's gonna be like this I'm picturing I'm just assuming it's gonna be bad. I mean, you see the
Assume the
NBA
worst.
ones, right? Like, it's, the Knicks one that bothers me with the, like, the New York that's, like, kinda got, like, the, what's the right word
The
for it?
double
But it
lettering,
looks
is it the
yeah, yeah, like, it's
breakaway?
kinda, like, blurred or whatever,
Yeah.
yeah, that one, like, I feel like you're supposed to wear, like, 3D glasses to see this, like, and I'm not I feel like I'm just one of these, like, the old guy complaining about, like, "Oh, just stick to the color," but it's like, "No, just don't make it obnoxious." It's not that hard of a criteria.
Well, yeah, and the Mets in the past have failed on putting some of these, things together. We saw in 2009 when they went to City Field and their patch looked like it was from Domino's, and
Yeah,
the Yankees had this nice pristine patch that represented, Yankee Stadium, and it just, it tends to just bother the Mets. I think what is it? Giants, Mets, Beaver put that hospital patch going back to
yep,
last year, that there was a lot of complaints about that. They had to shrink. One, they had to shrink it, and two, they had to make it Mets colors. So,
yep,
they're like the simplest things that like they shouldn't be messing up, that tends to be a problem. Carlos Ortiz says, if the photos I've seen are the ones they're using, they're worse than the new uniforms. Okay. I have not seen any
yeah,
photos
I
yet
haven't
on
seen
this.
yet either.
So
No.
we can only hope that we are getting something. And you know what? Can we just stay with the Mets colors? Let's not get crazy with other colors. I understood the Boston one, even though I didn't like the colors. I
Yeah,
understood it
right,
meant
the
the Boston
marathon.
Marathon and all that
Yep,
stuff. I got that. There's been some decent City Connect jerseys. Like I like the Chicago White Sox and the Anaheim Angels, or Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. I like those jerseys. I think there's been some good ones, but there's been some ones that have struck out. That's for definitely sure.
yeah,
Um,
no, that's it.
Jeff, I can't thank you enough for joining me today and being on this podcast. Let everyone know what you're working on, and how they can reach you on social media.
Yeah, sure. So just my name at Jeffrey Bellone, but really just look for at Mets Fix, or Google Mets Fix, and that's how you can find the newsletter. We put one out every weekday, and some weekend days, but definitely Monday through Friday every morning, and you get it right to your inbox, and it's kind of nice, especially nowadays if you're trying to stay away from X, Twitter, or whatever, and you still want to keep up with all the stuff that's happening. It's a real nice way that each morning you'll get that email and it will tell you everything that happened, but we'll also kind of give you some deep analysis like we've previewed here. So again, that's at Mets Fix, and yeah, no, really enjoyed coming on, and excited. This off season, I feel like it's just been a tough one because let's face it, since we even knew Cohen was going to become owner to these first years, it's sort of changed how we've looked at off seasons as Mets fans. And then this one, it's almost like we went back in time a little bit, back to how we used to feel, where yeah, they went hard after Yamamoto, but I think we felt like they weren't going to get him. Um, so it's sort of like finding the personality of this team right now. So I'm excited this year because I do think with Stearns they're in good hands, and I think we'll have a lot of good things to talk about.
Let's be honest, the Mets have never really had a set plan on putting a team together. Maybe in 2005, 2006, when Omar Minaya, kind of, put that team together with the signing of free agents of Pedro Martinez and Beltran, and then bringing in the year later LaDuca, Wagner, and Delgado. But
Yep.
it finally feels like there's a plan in place. We may not all like it, but, have we ever been through a time where, the Mets were going to evaluate the kids and to give them their opportunity to play? I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't think
no,
I've seen
and
it at all.
right. And I think the thing that is not talked about enough because everyone's so distracted by the payroll is, so it's all about, are Mets fans disappointed they're not spending more? What is really happening here to me is it shows a lot of Mets fans do not feel confident about the current group, maybe outside of Alvarez, don't feel as confident about this current group of kids, because otherwise, yeah, like you said, like what, Beatty, Vientos, I know they had really tough starts, right? There's reason to be
Mhm.
pessimistic. But like you said, we haven't seen this. And usually that creates excitement when a team invests in young top prospects. But I think it just says that last year soured so many people on them that it also took away from the excitement that otherwise you would have for the first time. And, maybe all of us being Mets fans, where you have this high number of not pitching, but positional prospects.
Beatty and Vientos don't even have 300 at bats yet in their career.
Right.
So
Yep.
let's leave that little, tea leaf out there. But Jeff, listen, Met fans, if you're tired of hearing, the rumors, innuendos, and all that stuff that goes on in the media and Mets radio and all that stuff, you want the information, you want the analytics, you want, all of the good stuff that comes from, this Mets talk. You got to sign up for Mets Fix and sign up for the newsletter. You'll get a lot of great info and analysis when it comes to this team, numbers, breakdown, everything. It has all. We just talked about contracts into 2025 and 2026. So definitely check it out. Mets Fix. Jeff, I can't thank you enough. Like I said, let's do this again sometime, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Really enjoyed it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much, Jess. That was Jeffrey Bellone, co-founder of Mets Fix. Subscribe to the newsletter. Like I said, you won't regret it at all. And that's going to wrap up Subway to Shea this week. You can follow on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. Listen to Subway to Shea podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or do like you're doing right now. You're watching on YouTube. Hit that subscribe, follow button, turn on your notifications, and never miss an episode of Subway to Shea. Please rate the show, leave comments, and if you're on YouTube, give a thumbs up. It really helps my content get out there and noticed for all to see. I would really, really appreciate that. And with that said, thank you all for tuning in and helping my podcast grow each and every week. This podcast is yours as much as it is mine, and you continue to be a major part of the success of the Subway to Shea brand. I appreciate every one of you. And for Anthony Rivera, this is the Subway to Shea podcast. And always remember, let's go Mets.